Hi guys, this is Mr. Brady. Today we are going to be discussing the well-being of the EMT. This is all about us as professionals working out in the field. This is about our care and taking care of ourselves to make sure that we can handle this kind of a job and that we don't burn out, and more importantly, that it doesn't lead to bad things such as suicide, attempted suicide, drugs, alcohol, bad family relationships, things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with a fun little video here I think you'll like.
Radio tones, some cold are unknowns. Get onto the scene to find a man alone, laying prone. Is it safe? 10-second scene survey. This is what we do every day. Took the 9-minute all the way. Rushing to my patient, keep it busy, no delay. He's not gonna die, no, not today. This is what I pray. You can call it a cliche, but this is my life. EMS always feels so surreal. I chill down my spine like the touch of cold steel. Assess my patient and it's all so real, no fear. Does he have a pulse? Yes, it's weak, but it's here. Pinpoint pupils, cool moist skin. Barely breathe and get that Narcan in. A day in the life working EMS. 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 A day in the life of an EMT. 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 A day in the life of a paramedic. Paramedic. Call the medic. Never do we stop. Never do we rest, kid. No matter how it gets. No matter how hectic. On to the next one before you start stretching. Resting, you guessed it. This is never ending. Checking, reading the call that I'm getting. 6-3 transmitting. The pedal I'm stepping. Flipping the switch. Sirens hot and yelping. Lights so bright. Got your retinas melting. Clock is ticking for this patient. I'm ready. Never reckless. Steady. Seat belted. I'm protected. I wanna get there fast. Keep my pace. I wanna get there safe. EMS is here helping people survive. So we ride, let's not ride or die. You better believe I'm gonna get my backside home alive. This is how I see it. If that means I gotta don my PPE, so be it. It's dangerous as it is. It's EMS biz. I take in the life working EMS. 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 I take in the life of an EMT. 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 I take in the life of a paramedic. Paramedic. Call the medic. Never do we stop. Never do we rest, kid. No matter how it gets. No matter how hectic. When it starts getting down to the wire, who you think is coming? EMS and fire. Putting our own lives on the line. Protecting spines. Getting it done whether you're seated or supine. Serious, benign. We never waste time. Stirring mankind till the scene is secure. Call after call. Tour after tour. We rise when you fall. No job too big and none too small. Minutes from your door where your EMT and paramedic line support. So here we go. Let the sirens blow fast. Never moving slow. How you know you're dealing with the bros with the nitro. EKGs, IVs, EGs, EPIs, and other drug therapies. Tourniquets, all the bleeds. New York City FD. Taking the life working EMS. 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 A day in the life of an EMT. EMT. EMT.
Well, I don't know about you, but that really excites me. I like that. So if I would have known about this stuff when I was your age, I think I probably would have done a different career, a completely different career perhaps. But I'm doing it now and love every minute of it. So let's go ahead and go through some principles that will help you in your life, as well as if you decide to do this kind of thing for a living. So really, don't forget, the most important thing that there is out there is your own safety, whether that be safety on the scene or at home. Keeping you safe is the most important thing we can do. This job is not for everyone. You must know your own limitations, and you can't let pride and embarrassment get in the way. If you don't know something, if you're not comfortable with something, you need to say something to somebody. It's not for everybody. It's true. There's many jobs out there that, don't require people to deal with other people's problems, where we don't see blood and guts, which is rare, by the way. But dealing with people is not always someone's favorite thing to do. But in my case, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I feel like I make such a difference in people's lives. When we get called to go to someone's house, to me, it's amazing, because people are calling us at their very worst times. Someone's sick, dying, extremely ill, something very bad has happened, and they're calling us and putting trust in us to help them out. No one wants to dial 911, but I like it when people know that I'm there to help, and that I'm going to do my very best to be helpful to them. So it's important, as we do this kind of a job, that we take care of ourselves, we have good relationships, we get the proper exercise and sleep, we eat right, and it's important that we never, ever, under any circumstance, turn to high quantities of alcohol or caffeine to solve our problems. Caffeine doesn't sound like a real big deal, but people that work graveyards and long night shifts and stuff like that tend to mess up their sleep habits. And as such, it's important that we don't get into the mode of needing any kind of drugs or pills to get through that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having caffeine for different things, but when you become reliant upon those things just to function, then you've got too much, and you've taken on too much upon yourself. We'll also talk a little bit about vaccinations and keeping ourselves up to date, because we do come in contact with all kinds of different things. It's definitely not just COVID. It's everything from hepatitis to the occasional meningitis and other things that we just do not want to come in contact with. So let's talk a little bit about our own PPE. The very first thing we learn in any medical course is the most important piece of equipment that you can wear is your gloves. BSI stands for Body Substance Isolation. So the very first thing you'll do on any test that I give you or anything like that is BSI seen as safe. Those are the two biggest things. When we ride on the ambulance, we have our gloves on before we even get out of the ambulance. We've been told that the scene is safe by our dispatchers. We make sure that we know that there's at least officers on scene, hopefully, and the scene is safe. So that's the very first thing. BSI, scene is safe. Get your gloves on. We follow rules put out by OSHA, which is the Occupational Health or Safety and Health Administration. And it's important that we follow those guidelines. The reason why is if we get hurt, injured, exposed, anything like that, and we're not following these basic rules, then we're not covered. We're not covered by any means. It's important that when we're on the freeways, we're wearing reflective vests, and we're wearing our gloves and goggles and masks and gowns when needed. We can't be the ones that says, oh, I don't need to wear gloves. It's not a big deal. One of the things that drives me crazy more than anything else is when I go to the ER and the nurses, and I'm not picking on any one nurse, but some of the nurses just never wear gloves. They start IVs, they bandage, they do all the stuff that they do without ever putting a pair of gloves on. And that really bothers me. So let's not us do that. We want to make sure that we are wearing proper equipment. Proper equipment ranges from that simple pair of gloves all the way up to full PPE, scuba gear kind of stuff that in some rare cases, not that I've had to wear that here, but in some cases in special situations, that has to be done. We do have N95 masks, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So start with your gloves. We do not recommend wearing any kind of latex glove because people are allergic to latex sometimes. So we wear vinyl or nitrile gloves. Nitriles are the most common. It's important to just always have a pair with you. I keep a box in my car, not just because I'm going to show up on the scene and I need them for someone's blood or whatever, but I mean, I work on my vehicles, and if I'm ever handling chemicals or things like that, anything where I'm going to get grease all over me or something like that, I put on a pair of gloves so my hands stay clean. I'm going to show you the short video on how to remove gloves correctly. When I come back, or when we're able to, we'll do a little activity where I'll have you go outside and I'll pour some fake blood on you. You do need to know how to take gloves off properly, and there is a skill to it. So go ahead and watch this.
Proper glove removal. Follow these steps to prevent the spread of pathogens. Pinch the first glove at the wrist and pull down, touching only the outside of the glove. Ball up the removed glove in the palm of your gloved hand. Slide an ungloved finger inside the other glove, touching only the inside with your ungloved finger. Peel the second glove off inside out, trapping it in your palm. Discard the balled up gloves in the proper receptacle. Clean your hands with soap and water or alcohol-based cleaner.
It seems pretty simple, but whenever I teach this little skill and we go outside and do it, about half the class fails it the first time and they splatter blood on themselves. So we'll get to practice this later, but it's important that we know how to do this simple skill. We do carry, of course, all kinds of alcohol-based and other kinds of hand sanitizers, and they're okay to use when soap and water are not available, but it's important that we take standard precautions, and we always wash our hands after any call. Anytime we've touched anything, we take the time. Hot soap or warm soap and water is really the very best, but the alcohol-based hand sanitizers will be effective when used correctly. So do wash your hands. We wash our hands all the time. My hands sometimes are very dry because I tend to wash them more than normal. I'm a little bit of a germaphobe because I go into so many places. I have learned that, we probably pass more disease through our hands than any other way, and so it's important that we take the time and clean our hands correctly. Hand sanitizer is okay, and it's sometimes good as a follow-up after washing hands as well. Okay, so eye and face protection sometimes are needed. So what conditions would require you to wear eye protection? There are a variety of things out there, such as childbirth. Anytime you feel that a patient may spit on you, I wear my glasses almost every time I go into the house. I put them on my hat, and when I walk into the house, when I approach that patient, I usually just put the glasses on. Not that I'm thinking everyone's going to spit on me, but I really just don't want to have any situation where I wish I would have done something. So protection and taking a little foresight, looking ahead, is a lot better than dealing with it later. If you get exposed through your eyes, if blood splatters in your eyes or something like that, then you will have an exposure and will have to deal with that. Right now, with COVID going on, of course, we wear masks 100% of the time with no exception. Unfortunately, some of our other people out there, some of the helpers that come, don't wear masks, thinking that they're somehow immune to everything, but we wear masks, and we should wear them as much as we can. And what kind of mask we wear sort of depends. So I want to talk for just a minute about the difference between masks. Masks have been shown to be very effective against the spread of disease, both protecting myself as well as protecting others. When two people wear a mask, the protection rate can go up to like 95%. It's very effective. Regular surgical hospital masks, the blue ones that we wear, are very effective. They work very, very well. There are cases where we have to switch to a more stringent kind of a mask called an N95. N95s, as you saw in this lady back here, that's an N95 mask. They look kind of funny, but they are extremely well built in such a way that they will block absolutely everything. They're not fun to wear. You have to breathe through it. They're not that bad, but these are the ones we have to wear when we have a COVID patient or a meningitis patient or anyone with a communicable disease that we're worried about. We will put on N95s. But again, regular surgical masks are usually pretty good for most things. It's important our dispatch will call us and tell us, this is a COVID positive patient or suspected. And if it's not COVID, they may say it's meningitis or hepatitis or whatever. We will take extra precautions, an extra pair of gloves put on, gowns, goggles, masks, face shields, the works. It really just depends on the type of call, and we rely heavily upon our dispatchers to tell us that. So when you have a patient that's vomiting or has vomited, I'm going to go ahead and put on that face shield just for my own protection, or my goggles, because there's a good chance that they could do it again. Okay, so what conditions might require to wear a gown? The most common time, and pretty much the only time I've ever had to wear a gown, is one during a childbirth. or in a few cases, we've worn them during a COVID house where there was a lot of contamination, several people sick and stuff like that. Okay, let's go through some of the diseases that we need to worry about, things that we can come in contact with in the field. Hepatitis is one of those, although it's quite rare. We do get vaccines for these, and they're paid for by the county or the health department. They have to give us these vaccinations. They're very effective, and so it's highly recommended that we get these when we work in the field. Hepatitis B and C, the good way to remember the difference is B stands for blood. There is hepatitis A as well, which is a fecal oral kind of a disease. But B and C are both bloodborne. They're carried through blood, and they can be quite dangerous. Both of them can cause death, sometimes very quickly. Tuberculosis is a lung disease. It's highly infectious. We don't see a lot of it, but we do occasionally hear or see it. It's much more common in larger cities and the slum areas outside the city where there's a lot of people living in closed areas, small apartments with lots of people in them. It's very, very contagious. So we have to make sure we know that and that we cover ourselves for that. We get TB tests periodically. Some of you may have had a TB test. We get those periodically to make sure that we have not contracted TB. There are treatments available, so it's important that we know that beforehand. HIV, of course, is possible through something like a needle stick. Even though EMTs don't use needles, it's still possible to get a stick. Patients themselves, if they're drug users, they may have needles in their pockets or on them. It's important that we're very, very cautious and ask them questions to see if they have any of these things, and have them turn out their own pockets, things like that. I mean, I'm not a police officer. I don't usually have to get them to turn their pockets out, but sometimes they'll volunteer that they have a needle on them, and it's important that you ask them to give it to you and you dispose of it correctly. Of course, if HIV develops, it can become full-blown AIDS, and we definitely don't want any of that. So this, again, is a bloodborne illness, and it's most commonly contracted through an accidental needle stick or in direct contact with blood. It's very rare that someone contracts HIV even through a needle stick. It's extremely rare. My sister's a nurse, and she's told me that she's been accidentally stuck with a needle as many as 5 times in her career, all of them, and some of them on HIV patients. And of course, she's really nervous, but she's never contracted any disease. It's the reason why typically is, if you think about it, if I poke my skin with a needle, the body's set up to kind of push things out, not pull things in. So it's, any infection tends to not want to travel very far. So hopefully that'll never happen. Ebola, even though it's extremely rare and I don't know of any cases that have ever happened in the state of Utah, it has made it to the United States more than once. 2014 was one of them. There has been others a little bit newer than that, although they were isolated very quickly and kept just in a small area. It would probably never make its way here. It's something that comes when people are traveling from overseas through airports, something like that, where they've been to parts of Africa where the rates may be high. It obviously is a deadly disease, certainly probably the deadliest disease that humans could come in contact with at this time. But luckily for us, it tends to stay somewhat isolated, and it's rare that we have big outbreaks. It's only happened a few times since we even knew about it back in the 80s. SARS is another one that we will sometimes see. SARS and MERS are coronaviruses. They're just like the coronavirus that we're dealing with right now, the COVID-19 virus. They're very similar. They can cause the same kinds of symptoms, and they have killed lots of people. They've both killed lots of people, and they are not completely eradicated by any means. So these coronaviruses are still around. Avian flu, bird flu, it's often called, can be found in poultry, raw meat. It's not highly transmitted that way, but it's easily transmitted from human to human through droplets, such as respiratory droplets. And then, of course, influenza has been around forever, and influenza has killed more people than any other thing, including all the wars and everything we've ever had. People die of the flu. Now, a lot of people don't really understand what I mean by flu. If I say the flu, and they say, oh, I had the flu last year, and I would ask him a question, well, how did it go? And they said, oh, I just stayed home for a day. I just had a little bit of a fever, a cough, or a sore throat. That's not the flu. That's something else. True influenza, if you contract true influenza, this is the kind of thing that will lay you out on your back and put you in the hospital for days, if not weeks. Most people equate any kind of illness they get during the winter as the flu. It is not. The influenza itself is a killer. And luckily it's treatable if we catch it early, but it still kills millions of people every year simply because of the fact that people don't fully understand it. And of course, a lot of people choose not to be vaccinated. We've had the vaccines for many, many, many years, but because people choose not to vaccinate, it's a kind of disease that will never really get under control, at least not currently. They have to create a new vaccine every year because this one is highly mutatable. It likes to mutate and change a lot. Okay, some few things about the law. As I mentioned earlier, if we do come in contact with something or suspect we come in contact with something, the very first thing that we must do is report that to our supervisor so that we can get proper monitoring and treatment. I won't read all this to you by any means, but there is an exposure control plan in every medical situation. If I got exposed, say, by a needle stick, the first thing we would do is I would contact the boss. I would tell him what had happened. He would fill out some paperwork. I would go to the hospital. They would do some blood work to kind of start a baseline. And then after that blood work, I would be monitored. It doesn't mean I can still go back to work and stuff most likely, but every few months, every 3 months or 6 months or so, they'll do more blood work to make sure I didn't contract anything. It might include a round of antibiotics or other medications to make sure that I don't contract any disease. I personally have never had to do this and hopefully never will, but it's just one of those risks that we do take. So I want to talk about the Ryan White Care Act. You'll need to know that. Ryan White Care Act. It was specifically created to protect EMS providers. What it does is, I'll just read it to you. It says, allows EMS providers to find out if they have been exposed to potentially life-threatening diseases while providing patient care. In other words, this has to be shared with us. It can't be kept secret so that we know if we've had any kind of exposure. For instance, let's say I go to some house and then, for a sick person, and then find out later after I've already taken them to the hospital and I'm home that this person had MRSA or they had meningitis, something quite contagious like that. I would have to be notified about that and then get the proper treatment for that. So that's what that's all about. And then we talked about tuberculosis. The N95 masks are very effective against tuberculosis. So if we even suspect anything like that, we'll automatically put an N95 mask on. And that's all that says. As far as immunizations, if you're going to work in the healthcare field, you're just going to have to get used to having your immunizations kept current. In some cases, you're not allowed to work in certain agencies if you refuse to get them, because obviously prevention is what they want. They don't want to have to pay for someone who decided not to get a hepatitis vaccine and then later contract it. And, what costs just a few dollars could cost thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatment. So it's important to just get those immunizations and get them on time at all times. Okay, the next part of this is dealing with emotion and stress. There are a lot of jobs out there that obviously have a very high stress factor, and this certainly is one of them. But what we want to talk about here is to make sure you know that we shouldn't let it become a situation where the stress overpowers us. It's going to be stressful. Things are stressful. That's just the nature of it. We get stressed out when we have to take a test or anything like that. But it's important to learn how to control how that stress affects our lives. I can't get rid of the stress per se, but I can control it. So the first stage of someone that is going through a stressful situation that can become bad is that sort of alarm or fight or flight. For instance, when you see someone die for the first time, or you see a very, very bad, accident or something that really affects you. At first you might say, oh, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm getting over it, I feel better. It can lead to a second stage of stress where now you start dealing with coping mechanisms. Now, what that means is it's still affecting you enough that you're trying to cope with it using things that you probably shouldn't. And examples, again, that we talked about are things like alcohol, drugs, other dangerous activities, things like that, to try to cope with the stress that you've experienced. The third step, of course, is exhaustion. This is where a person gets to the point where they're non-functional. They may stop working, they may stop eating, they may not leave their house. Suddenly they've gone from a person that was outgoing and doing their jobs to where they're just down and out, and you never see them anymore. And they've changed their behavior. They're not taking good hygiene practices. They're not showering. They're not eating. These are some real big alarms and things that we need to be aware of, not just in ourselves, but with people that we might be with or work around. So we all have triggers. So an acute stress reaction is something where there's a catastrophe, something big, something we did not expect. Obviously, when it happens to little children or babies, this really affects us a lot, particularly women. And then we start developing these stress reactions. They're acute, which means that they come on very quickly. We might wake up and have a nightmare for no reason. We might suddenly start having issues with our thinking, or we daydream more than we should. Just things start happening like that. So it's important that we recognize those right off, and we want to make sure that we get the treatment that you need. That's really important, that we get the treatment, because this can lead to suicide and some very bad things. It's not necessary for it to go to this level. When people develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it can happen days, weeks, months, even years after the incident happened. So we have to be able to recognize it within ourselves as well as others and get proper medical care as needed. I'll go ahead and skip a little bit here. So what are some things that can cause high stress? Multiple casualty incidents where you have like a school bus turned over, or there's a lot of people, where the stress levels go way up because now you don't have one patient, but you have lots of patients. And not only that, but those patients are seriously injured, dead, dying, things like that. Anything involving infants and children, as I talked about. Severe injuries that are, basically mortal injuries that they're probably not going to survive from. Decapitations, loss of body parts, organs coming out of the body. Very grotesque ones like that, which are very rare. I keep telling you that. It's a very rare thing to see like that, but for some people it may be too much for them to handle. Abuse and neglect is a hard one for me when I see parents hurt their children or neglect them in some way. And then if you have a very good friend that dies on the scene or somehow, that can be very, very devastating for a person. Eustress is the good kind of stress. This is the stress that helps us actually respond correctly, where, I get pumped up because I've got a ball game coming up. I'm stressed out about it, but I'm pumping myself up to do good. I've got a big test I have to pass. I'm pumping myself up. It's still stress, but the idea is the stress is actually helping you do better. Distress is the opposite, negative effect, and that's where that's going to actually cause us to start having problems. So people that have stress, they sometimes will get irritable for no reason. They'll lose the ability to concentrate. As I said, they change their daily activities. Their hygiene in general changes. They just don't act the same way they always do. They start becoming anxious, indecisive. They don't show up to work. They're late all the time. They isolate themselves. You don't see them for days. And then they suddenly I don't want to work anymore, or you just see strange behaviors like that. It happens. So if you start seeing this in a partner, let's say if your partner is beginning to show signs of stress, what do you do? Obviously, the worst thing you could do is ignore it. You may approach them and say, hey, I want to get you some help, and they may deny it. But it's important to go right to a supervisor or a principal or whoever's in charge and tell them what's going on. And that person may not want you to give them the help that they need, but we've got to act and make sure that we're doing our part. And then, they may have to take some steps, and they may have to take some time off, or it might change some things. But if we do this, then they'll get the help they need, and they can, get the mental health they need in order to improve. So some things that we can do just ourselves personally, being healthy and positive, having a good diet, not eating out crappy food all the time, exercising regularly, making sure we have some downtime for ourselves, relax, watch a movie, do something that you enjoy to do, take some time off. If you need to. If you're starting to feel burned out, ask to work a little bit less. Take some vacation time as needed. These are all things we all need at any time. And then finally here, I want to mention that when we do have a situation that may cause a great deal of stress, we have what's called the Critical Incident Stress Management Program, where they actually have paid psychologists and therapists that can come and meet with us. We get into a circle and we talk it out. I think I mentioned to you that I've had this happen once when I saw a 14-year-old girl die. It affected all of us. I didn't think it affected me, but sitting around and chatting about it and talking about how we felt was very, very useful. It's something we just don't want to blow off and say, no, thanks, I don't need that. I'm just going to go home. I'm fine. It's okay to just sit and talk it out, even if it's not causing you great distress at the time. So that's called the debriefing, and we do them whenever they're needed. They're paid for. We simply show up, and the professionals will help us get through whatever it is we need to so that we keep our mental health healthy. So the last thing here as we finish up, this is just about to the end, when we see stuff in the field like this where we suddenly see someone die, it's not the same as a funeral where we know what has happened and the person's in a casket and looks nice. When someone dies for other reasons outside of the situation, that can be stressful, particularly if it's a family member or something like that. It can be a very hard thing. We're watching family members cry, and it can be very, very, very emotional. People will go through these stages. They'll go through these. They're actually a 5-stage process. Let's go through these. The first one is, let's say a parent or a grandparent dies. The first step is they'll show denial. Like they'll say, oh, I just don't believe they're dead. I can't believe it. It can't be true. And then they show anger. It's like, how could you let this happen? Why? Why did this happen to me? And then they go into kind of a bargaining stage where they say, oh, please, if you'll just do this, I'll do this. And they try to find their ways to bargain through it. And then if we're not careful, it can lead into depression. And then if that depression continues without help, drugs and alcohol and suicidal tendencies tend to jump in, and it changes behavior, and they can really go downhill fast. What we want to get to, including ourselves and those that we're with, is we want to get to acceptance, where I have made it through this. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to be okay. I've got a good support system underneath me. I'm not afraid to move forward. This is a big deal. So please remember these steps, because it's often on tests, particularly the national one. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. So when we go through this process of someone that has died or is dying, we need to make sure we take care of that patient. We be tolerant of angry reactions of family members, because they're going to say, well, do something. Why can't you save them? Think about doctors probably get that a lot more than we do, but we get it in the field because we are in the house and they're yelling at us saying, save them. Make sure you listen to them. Don't get angry. Don't take things out on them. They're dealing with a stressful situation. Never falsely reassure. And that means never say words like, you know what, they're going to be okay. I know they're going to be okay. We don't know that. We don't want to say things like that and give them false hope, but rather say something like, we are going to do everything we can to help this person. I hate that because we see it on medical shows all the time. I like to watch medical shows, and I'm watching one right now, and the doctors are always, are they going to be okay? And the doctor says, oh, they're going to make it. We're going to get them through. And they don't know that. So make sure we provide realistic comfort. We shouldn't be lingering at a patient's house for a long time. If they want a hug, give them a hug, but we shouldn't be spending hours sitting on the couch and touching them and stuff like that. They have to learn to deal with that with their own family as well, and we move on. Okay, last is scene safety. We've talked about this a little bit. BSI scene is safe. It is our job to make sure the scene is safe. It's not the police officer's job. It's our job. We are responsible for ourselves. We love it when our police officers are on scene and they're there the whole time. That is wonderful, but still, if they're not there, it's still my responsibility no matter what. We take care of each other. We're always constantly monitoring what's going on around us. So if there's any kind of potential of a dangerous situation, we will be told by our dispatchers to stay away. We'll be told to park the ambulance 2 blocks away, or even stay at the building until the officers can get there and clear the scene. It's very important we never just rush into a situation like we're driving our own private vehicle. We never just drive to someone's house because we heard it on our pagers. Make sure we wait for law enforcement to get there to clear that scene. There have been situations where EMTs have been hurt or worse because they rushed into a situation that they shouldn't have been into. So we want to be really cautious with that. With hazardous materials, we don't even go there. We have a hazardous materials response team that they will page, that they will come in with their full scuba gear and their correct training, And these are the guys that are going to make sure that they get the scene safe before we even get there. Notice the police officer in this picture is looking at the fuel tanks from a distance. That way they can look up and see what's in those tanks before anyone can even go there. And then if we have to go through a decontamination phase, we do. Our buildings have showers in them. Most of us carry a change of clothes. So if we ever get exposed or think we can, we don't take it home to our families. There are times I've basically stripped out in my garage, taking off my clothes and my shoes, and literally mostly naked out standing in my garage as I run in to take a shower. But better than that is actually to shower and clean up at the buildings before we even go home and dispose of clothing. And we have washing machines. We can clean our clothes before we even go home. We don't want to take anything home. Terrorist situations are very rare in Sevier County. Obviously, we're very small, but we have had some strange situations where people have threatened with pipe bombs and some things like that, which I would consider to be a type of terrorism. And again, scene safety is everything. We don't go there. We have people they can call who are experts in bombs and hazardous materials. So this is not our job. So make sure we evaluate the situation before. If we're first on scene, if we beat all the police officers and everyone else there, we have to be very level-headed and think. And we have to basically say, you know what, I'm not going there until we get the correct trained people here. It may be hard because there might be people out there yelling, saying, come help me or come over here. And I'm like, we can't come and help you yet. Just reassure them that help is on the way. Any situation where there's a potential for a violent patient, again, we want to make sure that we have the right people there. The police officers are on scene. Sometimes when we show up, the police officers have the patient handcuffed already for our own personal safety. Notice how these guys are knocking on the door. We never knock on the door straight in front of the door. There are people out there that prey on police officers and EMS personnel and fire, and they will stand behind the door with a gun, and as soon as they hear that knock, they'll fire the gun and injuring or killing an EMT or a firefighter or a policeman. So always stand off to the side for your own personal safety. Hopefully, again, the police officers are doing this, but occasionally we have to do this ourselves. Be very observant. Listen for sounds. If you hear people yelling or screaming or things like that, it's important that we do not go to those scenes. Richfield pager's going off. So if you hear or smell or see or have any suspicion that something's wrong, you want to retreat, get on the radio and tell them what's going on and then reevaluate the scene. The safest place for you is in the ambulance with the doors locked, and then drive away from the scene if you have to. Again, we should not even approach the scene unless we have to. Notice here we have police officers in SWAT gear. They're ready to go. We've had to do this from time to time, and I don't go there until they have completely secured the scene. So make sure you can flee, get away from the scene if you suspect anything. If you have to, throw a piece of equipment at the person if you're being chased or something like that, and then duck and cover, proceed to cover and protect yourself. I like the EMTs here ducking behind the bush. If it was me, I would go further away and get back in the ambulance. So just don't ever get into that situation. Okay, that's it for this lesson today. I hope you've learned something. It's very important that your safety comes first. No one wants a situation where we hear of an injury or even worse, a death of a colleague or a coworker because they were in a place they shouldn't have been. So we have to be level-headed and just think before we act. And if we do these things, we will be safe. Thank you.